On that bitter December morning, Luke Mills thought he was just dealing with another problem on a long list of ranch problems. The sky over Montana was a washed-out gray, the kind that promised more snow, and the air had that hard, metallic edge that cut straight through his jacket. For most people, it would have been a good reason to stay inside. For Luke, it was just another day on the Flying M Ranch. The place had been in his family for 4 generations, 1,100 acres of rolling grassland, a modest herd of cattle, and equipment that kept going more out of stubbornness than good maintenance. When his father died 5 years earlier, Luke hadn't just inherited land. He'd inherited debt, broken machinery, and the constant weight of making sure the ranch didn't go under on his watch. He was 36 and already felt twice that. Late calves, busted water lines, winters that froze everything solid. None of that surprised him anymore. Hardship was baked into ranch life. You learned to roll with it, or you didn't last long. But that morning, when he drove out to check the water tanks in the back pasture, he saw something that made his stomach drop. There was a horse standing near the fence line. That alone wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how still she was. No grazing, no shifting weight, no flicking her tail at the cold wind. Just standing like a statue someone had forgotten in the middle of the nowhere. As Luke eased the truck closer, his heart sank. The mare looked like a ghost. She was a quarter horse, maybe 16 years old. What should have been a rich sorrel coat now reduced to a dirty, matted mess. Ribs stuck out like sharp shadows under her skin. Her hip bones jutted so harshly it hurt to look at her. Her head hung low, eyes dull and unfocused, the universal posture of an animal that had stopped expecting anything good from the world. Luke killed the engine and stepped out slowly. "Easy, girl," he said softly as he walked toward her. "Easy now." She didn't even flick an ear, didn't startle, didn't move away. She just existed, as if everything, fear, hope, instinct, had been burned out of her one thin meal at a time. Up close, the neglect was even worse. Her hooves were overgrown and cracked. Her coat was caked with mud and old sweat. No halter, no tag, no brand he could see. Nothing to tell him who she belonged to or how far she'd come to end up collapsing on his land. "How did you get here?" Luke whispered, resting a hand gently on her neck. "Who let you get this way?" "Out here." It wasn't unheard of for people to dump animals they couldn't afford to keep. Drive them out to a remote property and leave them behind, hoping some rancher with a softer heart than theirs would deal with the fallout. But looking at her, at the fine bone structure, the clean lines of her face, the conformation that screamed quality breeding, Luke knew this wasn't some backyard horse that had never been worth much. Someone had paid real money for this mare once. Someone had probably loved her too. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Angela, it's Luke," he said when the call connected. On the other end, Dr. Angela Voss, no-nonsense, experienced, and the go-to vet for most of the ranches in the area, answered with her usual brisk efficiency. "What's up, Luke?" "I've got a mare out here in bad shape." "Really bad," he said, glancing at the mare's hollow sides. "Body score maybe a 2. I don't think she's eaten properly in weeks." "But Angela, this horse is good breeding. Somebody put serious money into her once." A small pause. "All right," she said. "I'll be there in 30. But if she's as bad as you say, we might be looking at putting her down. Sometimes that's the kindest thing." Luke looked into the mare's eyes again. Under all that exhaustion and defeat, he saw something else. It was faint, almost gone, but it was there. A flicker. The tiniest spark of a will to live, buried under everything that had been done to her. "We'll see," he said quietly. "We'll see what she wants to do." While he waited, Luke went back to the truck and grabbed a lead rope. The mare didn't fight him when he slipped it over her neck. She didn't do much of anything. She was too weak to argue, too tired to care. Step by slow step, he led her toward the barn, stopping every few yards to let her rest, murmuring to her like she'd been his all along. Inside, he offered her a little water and a small handful of hay. Just a taste. Too much, too fast, and her body could shut down completely. Starving horses had to be brought back carefully. That was basic ranch knowledge. She drank a bit, nibbled at the hay without enthusiasm. That's when he saw it. As she shifted her neck, a clump of filthy, tangled mane slid aside, and Luke's blood ran cold. Burned into the skin of her neck, just visible beneath the hair, was a brand, 3 letters. R. Luke stared at it, his mind racing. He'd been in Montana his entire life. He knew every major brand within 500 miles. He could have identified half of them in his sleep. But this one, he'd never seen it before, and somehow he knew that meant trouble. What he didn't know yet was that those 3 simple letters weren't just a mark. They were a key to a story that had started 10 years earlier, hundreds of miles away, and was finally about to be dragged back into the light. Dr. Angela Voss pulled into the yard exactly when she said she would. That was Angela, always on time, never dramatic. But Luke had seen her deliver bad news with the same steady tone she used to talk about vaccinations. She walked into the barn, took one look at the mare, and let out a low whistle. "Luke, I'm amazed she's still standing," she said, running practiced hands along the mare's neck and ribs. "This isn't just someone forgetting to feed her. This is systematic starvation. Look at this muscle wasting. Look at her hooves. She's been neglected for months, maybe longer." "Can you save her?" Luke asked. Angela didn't answer right away. She checked her heart rate, listened to her lungs, lifted her lip to look at her gums and teeth. The mare stood quietly through it all, not because she was calm, but because she didn't have the strength to protest. "Maybe," Angela said finally, "but it's going to be touch and go. She'll need careful refeeding, parasite treatment, dental work. The real question is whether she wants to fight." "She does," Luke said, a little too quickly. "I can see it in her eyes." Angela gave him a small look but didn't argue. Instead, she moved to the mare's neck, parting the mane to check the skin. "What's this?" she murmured. She'd found the brand. The letters WR stood out clearly now that the hair had been moved aside, burned permanently into the skin. "That ring any bells?" Luke asked. Angela frowned. "Not around here?" She pulled out her phone. "Let me check the brand registry." For a few moments, the only sounds in the barn were the soft rustle of hay and the faint clicking of Angela's fingers on the screen. "Here it is," she said slowly. "WR, registered to Whispering River Ranch in Colorado. Brand active from 1995 to 2010. Luke blinked. "Colorado? That's, 300 miles from here?" "Roughly," Angela said. Her expression had gone serious in a way Luke didn't like. According to this, the ranch closed 10 years ago. All their livestock was listed as sold or relocated. Luke felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana winter. "So, if this horse belongs to a ranch that shut down a decade ago," he said, looking at the mare in the stall, "what is she doing here? And why does she look like she's been thrown away?" "I don't know," Angela said quietly, "but I think we should find out. Give me a few days. I'll make some calls, see what I can dig up about Whispering River Ranch." Luke ran a hand down the mare's neck over the WR brand. "Who are you, girl?" he whispered. "And what did they put you through?" He didn't know it yet, but that answer would reach back 10 years, into another state, into another family's worst nightmare. A story of a daughter, a champion horse, and a loss that had never truly healed. The next week turned into a quiet routine of survival. Luke divided his days between ranch chores and checking on the mare every few hours, feeding her in careful, tiny portions the way Angela instructed. Any more, and her system could shut down. Any less, and she wouldn't regain strength. She started responding bit by bit. Her eyes, once flat and unfocused, had a faint spark now. When Luke entered the barn with a feed bucket, she'd actually lift her head. Not much, but enough to show she hadn't given up completely. He talked to her more than he realized. "What's your story, girl? Who let you get this way? Someone out there must have cared about you once." She'd turn her ears toward him as he worked, as if she understood that someone finally saw her as more than a burden. By Friday, Angela called with news. "Luke," she said, "I found some information on Whispering River Ranch. The owners were Russell and Elizabeth Washington, big names in the quarter horse world back in the day. Their daughter Cassie was a rising star in junior cutting competitions." Luke leaned against the barn wall, phone pressed to his ear. "So, what happened to them?" Angela hesitated. "Something awful. Their daughter died in a car accident at 17. After that, the family fell apart. The ranch went under within a year." Luke looked at the mare, so still, so quiet, so alone. "And the horses?" "Most were sold at foreclosure," Angela said. "But I found old show records. The Washingtons had a champion mare named Starlight's Dream, Cassie's personal horse." Another pause. Dark sorrel coat, white blaze, 2 white socks. Luke stared into the stall, heart hammering. Dark sorrel, white blaze, 2 white socks. "Angela," he said quietly, "I think she's in my barn." The mare lifted her head then, just slightly, almost as if she felt the weight of her own name floating back toward her after a decade lost. Her story was beginning to surface, and it was far, far bigger than Luke expected. Once the shock wore off, Luke couldn't shake the feeling that the pieces didn't add up. If Starlight had been a champion, if she'd belonged to a respected ranching family, how did she end up starving on his land like an unwanted stray? Something was wrong, very wrong. He spent the weekend digging through anything he could find online. Old competition articles, archived photos, write-ups from junior cutting events. Every piece he read painted the same picture. Cassie Washington and Starlight's Dream had been unstoppable. A girl with natural talent and a horse with a heart that matched it. They were on their way to nationals before everything fell apart. But the foreclosure records bothered him. According to those, all the livestock was sold. Yet Angela had just told him Starlight never appeared at the auction. How could a horse that valuable simply vanish? Luke called Angela again. "You're not crazy to question it," she said. "Let me check with the auctioneer who handled the sale. Maybe he'll remember something." She called back Monday afternoon, and her first words made Luke's stomach drop. "Luke, Starlight was never auctioned. She disappeared before the sale." He gripped the phone tighter. "Disappeared how?" "The auctioneer told me the stall gate had been cut open with bolt cutters. Russell Washington insisted she'd been stolen, but he was drowning in grief and alcohol at the time, so nobody believed him." Luke felt anger rise like a flame. "People thought he faked the theft?" "They did. The insurance company even investigated him." Angela paused, but the auctioneer said Russell was hysterical, claimed someone had taken the last piece of his daughter he had left. Luke looked toward the stall, where the mare, Starlight, was quietly munching hay. "So she really was stolen," he said. "It sure looks that way." Luke ran a hand over his face, overwhelmed by the sudden weight of it all. 10 years gone, 10 years missing, 10 years of being passed around, misused, neglected. And somehow, she survived long enough to wander onto his land. Angela's voice softened. "There's only one person who deserves to know she's alive." Luke already knew the name. "Elizabeth Washington," he said quietly. "Find her," Angela replied. "She's the closest thing Starlight has left." And just like that, Luke understood something heavy and undeniable. Saving Starlight was no longer just an act of kindness. It had become a responsibility. To heal what was broken, to find answers, and to reunite a horse with the only family she ever truly belonged to. Finding Elizabeth Washington turned out to be harder than Luke expected. The woman had essentially vanished from public life after losing her daughter, her husband, and the ranch that had been their world. No address, no social media, nothing recent in public records. It was like grief had swallowed her whole. But Luke wasn't giving up. He posted in quarter horse forums, cutting horse groups, and equestrian rescue communities. He attached photos of the mare, now slowly filling out, her coat cleaner, her eyes brighter, and asked if anyone remembered the Washingtons. Within hours, the responses poured in. People remembered Whispering River Ranch. People remembered Cassie, the girl with the giant grin and the fearless riding style. People remembered Starlight's Dream, a horse many swore was the most athletic mare they'd ever seen. But nobody knew where Elizabeth was now. Then, late Thursday night, Luke received a private message from a woman named Diana Rodriguez. She'd written only a few sentences, but they made his pulse spike. "I knew Elizabeth. Our daughters competed together. I might be able to help you find her. Please call." Luke didn't wait. He dialed immediately. Diana answered on the second ring, her voice warm but already thick with emotion. "When I saw that picture," she said, "I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. That horse looks exactly like Starlight. But I have to ask, how sure are you?" Luke explained everything, the brand, the condition he'd found her in, the vet's research, the matching markings. "The brand is the key," Diana said. "Russell branded only one horse with those initials. Starlight was supposed to be Cassie's signature mount, her dream horse, literally. He did the WR brand just for her, to mark that moment." "Can you find Elizabeth?" Luke asked quietly. Diana hesitated. "I can try. I know she moved to New Mexico after losing the ranch. Everything after that, she kept to herself. Let me make some calls." 3 days later, Luke's phone rang again. "I found her," Diana said. "But Luke, she hasn't had an easy life. Be gentle with her." That evening, Luke sat at his kitchen table, staring at the number Diana had given him. He glanced out toward the barn, where Starlight, he'd started calling her by name, was resting peacefully. She'd put on weight. Her coat was improving. Her gaze followed him now, not with fear, but with a question, one he was finally ready to answer. Luke picked up the phone and dialed. A tired voice answered. "Hello? Mrs. Washington? My name is Luke Mills. I believe I found your daughter's horse." Silence, long, breathless silence. Then a sound, half gasp, half sob. "Starlight?" she whispered. "Starlight's been gone for 10 years. Luke swallowed. "Ma'am, I think she's ready to come home." The story was about to shift from survival to reunion, from tragedy to something like hope. Elizabeth Washington arrived 3 days later. Luke watched her truck rattle up the driveway from the kitchen window. She didn't get out at first. She just sat there behind the wheel, staring at the barn like she wasn't sure she had the strength to face whatever waited inside. When she finally stepped out, Luke was struck by how small she looked. Not physically, just diminished. Like grief had hollowed her out from the inside, and time had filled the empty spaces with quiet endurance instead of healing. "Mrs. Washington," he said gently as he walked out to meet her. She managed a thin smile. "Please call me Elizabeth, and thank you for contacting me." Her eyes kept drifting toward the barn, equal parts hope and dread. "I should warn you," Luke said. "She's in much better condition now, but when I found her, it wasn't easy to see." Elizabeth's expression tightened. "If someone hurt her, I need to know. That horse was my daughter's heartbeat. Losing her once nearly destroyed us. Losing her again." She shook her head. "I just need to see her." They walked toward the barn together. Inside, Starlight was dozing in the late afternoon sun streaming through the window. Luke had brushed her earlier, smoothing her coat so Elizabeth wouldn't be met with the version of the horse who had nearly died in the snow. But nothing. Nothing could have prepared him for the moment Elizabeth finally saw her. Her knees buckled. Luke caught her before she fell. "Oh my God," she whispered, hand pressed to her mouth. "It's really her. It's really Starlight." The mare lifted her head at the sound of Elizabeth's voice. Her ears pricked forward, her nostrils flared, and then, soft but unmistakable, came a trembling nicker, a sound full of recognition and longing. "She remembers me," Elizabeth said, voice breaking. "After 10 years, she still remembers." Luke opened the stall door. Elizabeth stepped inside slowly, like approaching the past itself. Starlight pressed her face into the woman's hands, breathing her in, leaning against her like a creature desperate to close the distance of a lost decade. "Hello, baby," Elizabeth whispered. "My beautiful girl, I've missed you so much." Starlight closed her eyes and rested her forehead against Elizabeth's chest. Luke had only seen horses do that with people they trusted completely. Elizabeth stayed in that stall for almost an hour, touching every inch of the mare, whispering apologies, memories, pieces of the life they'd shared before grief tore everything apart. When she finally stepped out, wiping her eyes, Luke asked quietly, "What do you want to do now?" Elizabeth rested a hand on the stall door. "Legally, she's mine, but that's not why I'm here." She looked at him, steady now. "I want to do what's best for her." Luke nodded. "So do I." Elizabeth's gaze softened. "Then maybe," she said, "we figure that out together." This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of Starlight finding her way back, not just to the woman who'd loved her first, but to the life she deserved now. Elizabeth stayed in a small motel in town and spent the next 2 days at the ranch from sunrise to dusk. Each hour brought back another memory, another detail about the horse she'd once known like the back of her hand. Luke soaked up every word. "Cassie got Starlight as a 2-year-old, Elizabeth said one afternoon as they watched the mare graze outside. She was all legs and stubbornness back then. Most people saw a wild filly. Cassie saw potential. She described the hours her daughter spent training Starlight, barely 15 years old, but already a natural horsewoman with instincts you couldn't teach. They grew together, trusted each other completely, won competitions that seasoned riders twice Cassie's age struggled with. The goal was nationals, Elizabeth said softly. Cassie had worked 3 years for that. She'd just qualified 2 weeks before. Her voice trailed off. Luke didn't push. Some silences weren't meant to be filled. Instead, he watched Starlight lift her head at the sound of Elizabeth's voice, ears flicking toward her like echoes of old lessons. Even after everything, the connection was still there. That evening, Elizabeth surprised him. "I want you to ride her," she said. Luke blinked. "Me?" "She was trained to work under saddle. If she's going to live here long term, we need to know if she still remembers." So the next morning, with Elizabeth leaning on the fence rail, Luke saddled Starlight carefully. He expected flinching fear, some sign of the trauma she'd endured. But Starlight stood perfectly still, ears forward, calm, attentive. When Luke mounted, she waited, poised, patient, until he gave her the slightest cue. And then she moved, smooth, balanced, precise. She wasn't just a horse. She was an athlete who hadn't forgotten a single moment of the training Cassie had poured into her. "After all these years," Elizabeth whispered, tears streaming freely now. "She still remembers my daughter." Luke guided Starlight through simple transitions. Walk, trot, turn, stop. She responded instantly, like someone had flipped a switch back on inside her. She even threw her head once, playful, almost showy, as if rediscovering a part of herself she thought she'd lost. Luke dismounted, breathless. "Elizabeth," he said, "she's incredible." "She always was." Elizabeth stepped forward, resting a hand on Starlight's cheek. Cassie used to say Starlight wasn't just a horse. She was her partner, her dream, her heart. Then, with a small, trembling exhale, she added, "I think Cassie would have wanted her to be with someone who sees that too." Luke didn't know what to say. Starlight nuzzled his shoulder like she'd already made her decision. And maybe she had, because some bonds weren't measured by time or ownership, but by who showed up when everything fell apart. That night, after Luke finished the chores and walked Elizabeth back to her truck, she turned to him with an expression he hadn't seen before, something steady, fragile, and brave all at once. "I want to transfer ownership to you," she said quietly. Luke froze. "Elizabeth, I can't accept that." "You have to," she insisted softly. "It's the right thing." He shook his head. "She's worth thousands of dollars. And more than that, she's all you have left of Cassie. You don't owe me anything." Elizabeth looked past him toward the barn, toward the mare who had survived 10 years of being lost. "Luke," she said, "for a decade, I've lived with guilt I couldn't put into words. I lost my daughter, then I lost the ranch, then the horses, and Starlight. Losing her felt like losing Cassie all over again." Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "But seeing her here, seeing how she's healed under your care, I realized something." She placed a hand on the porch railing, steadying herself. "Starlight doesn't need me to own her," she said. "She needs to be safe, loved, seen. And you've given her that without even knowing who she was." Luke swallowed hard. "Elizabeth, I'm not walking away," she added quickly. "I want to visit, help when I can, stay in her life. But she deserves stability. And you can give her that. I can't." Luke exhaled slowly. He looked toward the barn, where Starlight was resting, her silhouette framed by the glow of the stall light. She lifted her head at the sound of their voices, as if she knew she was being talked about. "Before I say yes," Luke said eventually, "I have one condition." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "You tell me everything," he said. "Every detail about her, her quirks, her training, her habits, her likes and dislikes. If I'm going to care for her, I want to know who she was before she ever ended up here." For the first time all day, Elizabeth gave a real smile. "Luke Mills," she said softly, "I can talk about that horse for hours." And she did. The next 2 days became a small, unexpected pocket of healing for both of them. Elizabeth told stories about Cassie and Starlight until her voice grew hoarse. How Starlight used to unlatch gates, how she hated having her ears cleaned, how she danced impatiently before competitions, how Cassie used to braid tiny blue ribbons into her mane for good luck. Then, Elizabeth shared the memory Luke hadn't asked for but desperately needed, the truth behind Starlight's disappearance. "There was a man named Clayton Reed," she said, "Russell's assistant trainer. Ambitious, too ambitious." Luke listened, jaw tightening with every word. Clayton wanted Starlight for himself. Claimed Cassie was too young to handle a horse with that much talent. Russell fired him when he caught him trying to train her behind our backs. Elizabeth stared at her hands. After Cassie died, Clayton came back and offered to buy Starlight. Russell threw him off the property. Her voice hardened. 2 weeks later, Starlight disappeared, fence cut with bolt cutters, no witnesses. Everyone blamed Russell. But I knew Clayton took her. Luke rubbed a hand over his face. "So she was stolen. And then what?" "I can only guess," Elizabeth said bitterly. "Used for breeding. Passed from one uncaring owner to another. And when she got too old to produce foals, tossed aside like she didn't matter." Luke's stomach twisted. He looked out the window at Starlight grazing peacefully, unaware her past was finally being pieced together. "She deserved better," he whispered. Elizabeth nodded. "But she has better now." The next morning, she signed the ownership papers. When she left the ranch, she hugged Starlight one last time, whispered something into the mare's ear, then stepped back with tears, but not the same kind she'd arrived with. "Take care of her, Luke," she said, "and let her take care of you too." Cassie always said Starlight had a way of finding the person who needed her the most. Luke watched her truck disappear down the dirt road. In the pasture, Starlight lifted her head and looked toward him, like she'd chosen him too. 6 months later, the transformation was unreal. Starlight, the half-dead mare Luke had dragged out of the snow, now gleamed in the Montana sun, strong, bright-eyed, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of a horse who finally remembered who she used to be. Luke stood at the same fence line where he'd first found her. Now, instead of a collapsed skeleton, she was cutting through the spring grass with the fluid, athletic movement that had once won championships. She'd rediscovered purpose, and Luke could feel it every time he rode her. Sharp turns, quick reads on cattle, instincts still razor-sharp despite 10 forgotten years. She wasn't just surviving. She was back. Elizabeth and Luke had fallen into an easy rhythm too. Weekly calls, photos exchanged, small updates about training progress, or silly quirks Starlight picked up. It felt like a family rebuilding itself around a mare who refused to give up. Then, one phone call shifted everything. Luke answered to hear Elizabeth's voice, excited, breathless. "Luke, we figured out where she's been." He froze. "Where?" "Diana found records. After Clayton Reed died, 6 years ago, authorities seized more than 40 neglected horses from his property. Starlight was among them." Luke's jaw clenched. So she went from being stolen to being rescued, just to be neglected again? "It gets worse," Elizabeth said softly. "One of the officers remembers an older sorrel mare being sold to a man named Pete Valdez. Small-time breeder. Bad reputation. He went bankrupt last fall and walked away from his horses." Luke felt the pieces snap together. "And she wandered," he whispered, "for months, until she ended up here." "Luke, she survived 2 abandonments," Elizabeth said, "and still fought to keep going. She found you for a reason." He looked out across the pasture. Starlight had lifted her head, ears pricked toward him, her stride light and confident. A horse who'd been stolen, exploited, discarded, twice, and still refused to lose herself. Luke swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe she did. Because some horses didn't just survive. They found their way home, even if home wasn't where they started." Word about Starlight started spreading faster than Luke expected. It began with a single video, a short clip he'd sent Elizabeth of Starlight working cattle again, moving with that old champion precision. Elizabeth forwarded it to Diana. Diana sent it to an old trainer friend. And within a week, half of Colorado's cutting community was talking about the ghost mare who'd come back from the dead. One evening, Luke was brushing her down when his phone buzzed. A trainer from Colorado, well-known, well-respected, wanted to know if Luke would bring Starlight to a small local cutting show. Nothing serious, nothing competitive, just an appearance. "Let her stretch her legs," he'd said. "Remind the world who she is." Luke hesitated. She was 16, older, still healing. But when he told Elizabeth, she didn't even blink. "Luke," she said, "Cassie always believed Starlight came alive in the arena. Maybe this is her way of reclaiming herself." So Luke agreed. The morning of the event, Starlight walked out of the trailer like she owned the place. No fear, no hesitation, just that sharp, focused calm of a horse stepping into familiar territory after too long away. "Look at her," someone whispered. "That can't be the same mare from the Flyers. She moves like she's 10 years younger." When Starlight entered the arena, something electric passed through her. Her head lifted, her stride sharpened, and for a few breathtaking minutes, she transformed, no longer the horse who'd survived starvation, but the champion she'd once been groomed to become. She didn't win that day. Luke wasn't trained for cutting competitions, and he knew it. But Starlight didn't care. She was performing. She was seen. She was remembered. After the show, people lined up to meet her. Some cried. Some told stories of watching Cassie and Starlight compete years ago. Some simply whispered, "I can't believe she's alive." Luke drove her home in stunned silence, not because of the attention, he didn't care about that, but because Starlight had looked happy, truly happy, for the first time since she'd stepped onto his land. That night, as he fed her, she nudged his arm gently, almost playfully. "You're something else, girl," he murmured. Starlight flicked her ears and leaned into his touch. It hit him then. She wasn't remembering her past. She was reclaiming her future. A few weeks after the show, Luke got a call that stopped him mid-stride in the barn aisle. Elizabeth's voice, shaken, urgent. "Luke, and Diana found the last missing piece." He braced himself. "Tell me." "It's about Clayton Reed, the man who'd stolen Starlight." "He died 6 years ago," Elizabeth continued. "And when authorities went through his property, they found over 40 neglected horses. Starlight was one of them." Luke closed his eyes. It made too much awful sense. "And after that?" he asked. "She was sold to a backyard breeder named Valdez," Elizabeth said. "He went bankrupt last fall and abandoned all his horses. Some broke through fencing and scattered." Luke stared at Starlight through the stall bars, strong now, recovering, watching him with those deep, steady eyes. "So she walked," he murmured. "For miles, maybe for months, until she reached you," Elizabeth finished softly. It hit him like a punch. Starlight hadn't just survived neglect. She had searched her way to safety, as if refusing to die in someone else's story. That evening, Luke stood beside her, hand resting against her warm, solid neck. "You're a miracle," he whispered. Starlight exhaled and leaned into him, calm and sure. And Luke understood something he couldn't explain. She hadn't stumbled onto his ranch. She had found it, found him. Because some animals don't wait to be saved. They come home on their own terms. Spring brought a quiet rhythm to the ranch. Luke worked cattle. Starlight followed him everywhere, at the gate, at the fence line, trailing him like a shadow with a heartbeat. One morning, as Luke was tightening a fence wire, he realized she was watching him with a focus that felt almost protective. Not anxious, just present, connected. She wasn't a rescue anymore. She was a partner. Later that week, he and Starlight ran a few simple cutting drills. Nothing serious, just a light workout. But the moment a cow broke from the herd, Starlight lit up, ears sharp, body low, reacting with that old championship fire. Luke barely had to cue her. She moved like she remembered the entire job on instinct. When they finished, he laughed out loud for the first time in a long time. "You're unbelievable," he told her. Starlight nudged his shoulder, almost smug. That night, after turning her out, Luke paused at the barn door and watched her trot into the pasture, strong, confident, a completely different horse from the one he'd dragged out of the snow. She'd come back to life, not because someone saved her, but because she chose to fight her way back. And Luke couldn't shake the thought pulsing in his chest. Maybe she wasn't just healing. Maybe she was healing him. Summer brought something Luke never expected, a sense of normal. Starlight grazing by the creek, phone calls from Elizabeth every Sunday, photos, updates, small conversations that felt like family knitting itself back together. Then, one afternoon, Luke got a message from a Colorado trainer. "If you're ever in the area, Starlight should run one more exhibition, just once. She deserves that spotlight." Luke didn't commit, but the idea stuck. That evening, as he brushed Starlight down, she stood calm and relaxed, eyes half closed. And then, out of nowhere, she bumped his shoulder with her nose, sharp and playful, like she was saying, "Well? You want one more run, don't you?" He laughed. Her ears shot forward. Yeah, she wanted it. But before Luke could think about competitions, more news came, this time from Elizabeth, voice trembling with something between fear and relief. "Luke." Diana dug deeper. "It's confirmed. Clayton stole her, sold her, and every home she had after that neglected her, abandoned her. Twice." Luke's hands tightened around the phone. "And still," Elizabeth said softly, "she fought to stay alive until she found you." Luke walked to the pasture gate and watched Starlight lift her head toward him, her whole posture relaxed and trusting. "Elizabeth," he said quietly, "I'm starting to think she didn't just end up here." A pause. Then Elizabeth whispered, "I think Cassie sent her home." Starlight stepped closer, stopping just in front of Luke. Warm breath, soft eyes. A survivor who refused to quit. And Luke felt it. Some stories don't need proof. Their truth is in the way they make you believe again. By early fall, Starlight wasn't just healthy, she was radiant. Her coat glowed, her stride lengthened, her old champion spark was fully back. One crisp morning, Luke saddled her for a light ride. The moment his boot hit the stirrup, Starlight shifted her weight forward, ready, eager, alive. She moved beneath him like she knew exactly where they were going, even when he didn't. Halfway across the pasture, Luke stopped her, just to look at her. She turned her head, ears flicking back as if to say, "What now?" "You're something else," he murmured. That evening, Elizabeth called. "Luke, do you ever think about what comes next for her?" He glanced at Starlight through the barn window. She was dozing, one back hoof cocked, completely at peace. "I think she's already where she's supposed to be," he said. Elizabeth exhaled, a soft, heartfelt sound. "Cassie would have adored you for that." The next week, Luke received a small package from her. Cassie's photos, competition ribbons, Starlight's original papers, a lifetime in a box. Luke opened it slowly, hands surprisingly unsteady. The first photo showed Cassie hugging a much younger Starlight, both of them smiling in their own way. Pure joy, pure trust. He looked up at Starlight in her stall. "You've had a whole life before me," he whispered, "but if you'll let me, I'll make the rest of it good." Starlight lifted her head, blinked at him, and stepped forward until her nose rested softly against his chest. Answer given. Winter crept back into Montana the same way it always did. Quietly, then all at once. But this time, Luke didn't dread it. Not with Starlight waiting for him at the gate every morning, ears forward, breath steaming in the cold air. One evening, as snow began to fall in slow, soft flakes, Luke stood beside her in the barn aisle, brushing out her mane. She leaned into him gently, the way horses do when they feel safe, when they've chosen you. His phone buzzed, a message from Elizabeth. "Thank you for giving her a real home." Luke looked at Starlight, strong, bright, healed, and typed back, "She gave me one too." Later that night, he turned her out into the pasture. Starlight walked a few steps, then stopped and looked back at him, really looked, with that quiet, knowing intelligence she'd always carried. 10 years stolen, 2 abandonments, months wandering alone. And still she'd fought her way here. Some horses survive, but only a few find their destiny. Starlight lowered her head to nibble at the snow-dusted grass, completely at peace. Luke stood at the fence, breath clouding the air, and realized something simple and absolute. She wasn't the broken mare he'd rescued. She wasn't the champion she once was. She was something new, a survivor who'd found exactly where she was meant to be. And Luke knew, with a certainty that felt almost sacred, this was home for both of them.